In this video, we're going to talk fly proportions, silhouettes, shapes, whatever you want to call it. The good, the bad, and the ugly. So to just get this out of the way before we ever start, everybody has tied those really bad flies. Those that are just, yeah, they're not good. I would venture to say that the majority of the time, a few little tweaks in materials and how you use them, and those flies would have been just fine. So in this video, we're going to look at proportions of small streamers and nymphs, because I feel like those are the two types of flies that I've seen bad proportions on in pictures on like the social medias and stuff like that. So a little caveat about this video. Each one of these examples is gonna be like a general example. It's not like a be-all end-all. But what I'm gonna show you is a pretty good way to kind of judge most flies. So when I think of a small to medium-sized streamer that I've seen tied in some incorrect proportions and some funky, just funky, my mind goes to the woolly bugger. In my eyes, there's really two different ways to look at a woolly bugger: a thin-dressed woolly bugger and a pretty thick-dressed woolly bugger. Now, I would say neither one of these are tied poorly or incorrectly. They have good proportions, but one would be used for maybe clearer water and one would be used for maybe dirtier water. But I would say both of these have good proportions, kind of what you look for in a woolly bugger. So when we really dive into what we're talking about, when we start saying proportions, we start saying the profile of the fly. That's what we're really talking about. So what I've run into with woolly buggers mostly is almost tying the fly in reverse. So instead of tying your hackle material in by the tip and tying it in like toward the butt section of that hackle, you're not going to get... Let me explain a little differently. Some materials kind of have built-in proportions. Marabou. Marabou for a tail on a woolly bugger is what everybody's going to use. This stuff is automatically proportioning itself. You can see how it's thicker in the middle, and as you go out toward the end, it gets thinner. That's automatically helping a profile, automatically helping with your proportions. There's a couple different ways to use marabou on a woolly bugger, but I'm a strip the stem kind of guy. So I'm going to strip a little bit off and use this as my tie-in portion. If this is my hook, I don't want a tail that's like way out here. I want to keep my tail about the length of the hook shank. That gives you a rough estimate of what you're looking for. So I'm going to start about here. Tie this in. Now right off the bat, I don't want to cut this. I'll explain in a second. So if I leave this tail the way it is right here, it'll get really, really skinny really, really quickly when it's wet. All these proportions only matter when it's wet. So I need to strip a little bit more and tie them in the same length. So now we want that gradual build in profile as we go toward the head of the fly. So instead of cutting off all this extra marabou back here at the tail, I'm going to use it to help build my profile. So I'm just going to take my thread up over this and bring my thread back to the tail. So when we get ready to cover this, we don't have to use as much material to build the taper as we would have if we just had a bare shank. So for the hackle on a woolly bugger, I'm totally a schloppen guy. But schloppen, just like everything else, comes in different sizes and shapes and textures and all this stuff. So you have to pick the correct size of schloppen to help the proportions based off of your hook size. In this case, this schloppen feather is fantastic. It's going to have shorter fibers down here and they're gradually going to get longer. So when we tie this in by the tip and we wrap it forward, as we wrap, those fibers are going to get longer. We're building a shape from smaller to bigger. Now if we were to use this schloppen feather instead, there are very few short fibers on it, and then they go to really long. So by the time we get to the mid body, the fibers are going to be really, really long, creating like a blob of a woolly bugger. So we're tying the skinnier schlappen feather in by the tip. Even though we're going to wrap this schlappen over the underbody, we still need to build a taper in the underbody. So I'm going to dub a body that starts off skinny down here and works and builds bigger and bigger as I go toward the eye of the hook. So we start off skinnier at the tail and get bigger toward the head. So now, since I've already picked a good schlappen feather, as I wrap this schlappen feather on, it's automatically going to give me my proportions. So you can tell the fibers start off smaller back here and get gradually longer as we get closer to the head of the fly. So I'm excited to announce that this video is sponsored by Skillshare. Skillshare is an online learning community with thousands of inspiring classes for anyone who loves learning and wants to explore their creativity and learn new skills. Not only is Skillshare the perfect place to learn a new skill, but it's also a great place to take your current skills to a whole new level. So lately I've been getting the bug to start shooting photos again and to take better pictures of my flies and stuff like that. And I have done so many deep dives on macro photography and outdoor photography, several Skillshare classes on photography. In the description of this video is a link for a 30-day free trial of Skillshare for the first 1,000 people to sign up. To give it a shot and see what you like, you wouldn't believe everything there is to learn on here. I was blown away by how much they have to learn. So over the next few videos, I'm going to show you some different ways that I've used Skillshare and what I've grown to love about it. So when it comes to nymphs, and I'm talking like just like a regular nymph, like a hare's ear or a pheasant tail or something like that, the issue I've seen most in poorly proportioned flies is usually has something to do with the dubbing. It's like either you have a big glob of dubbing in the rear and the taper doesn't really happen, or there's not enough of, and it just several different things can happen. But what you've heard me talk about in this video is we want to start with a smaller taper on the back of the fly and build a smooth taper to the head. So like this pleasing, nice taper instead of globs of something. So this is just a little mayfly nymph. Just nothing in particular, but you can tell it's proportionally correct. The body builds towards the thorax. The thorax is bigger to the head. This is a well-tied fly. Now in this fly, a little bit of everything is wrong with it. The tail is way too long. There's a big glob of dubbing here, and the taper just is almost backwards. So we're looking at good fly versus poorly tied fly. Just look at the proportions. Good fly, bad fly. Yeah. So the proportions that we've covered in this video are just that of standard nymphs, standard woolly bugger, that type of thing. The bigger articulated streamers, and stuff like that are a little different, and that's probably a future video. But this is a pretty good standard as far as what most people should look for in proportions of a standard nymph and a standard woolly bugger. Now obviously some of these things are totally different. If you only tie scuds, yeah, the proportions of scuds are going to be different. But this is a good start on what you should look for, how to build a fly, and the general shape of these flies. So now I guess I have to plan a video on proportions of articulated streamers.